long time ago. So he just admitted there was this.
Yeah, we should begin.
I'm ready.
Are you ready, John?
Yeah, can you hear this? Working good. Tonight for a workshop, the regular meeting will begin at 7:30. We usually do a training session from 7 to 7:30, and tonight we're going to talk about traffic calming issues on Main Street. This is part of the Access Committee's work. And they're preparing a sort of a summary report of all the recommendations now, and we're fighting through this section on speeding and traffic calming. And it's the last section in the report. So back in 2019, there was a study done, a 2-day session sponsored by the Federal Highway Administration on pedestrian safety. And they brought in a team of consultants to go up and down Main Street and make sort of interim recommendations. And this is their report, the cover. You can see no crosswalks at the intersection. This is at Walnut at that time. This is before the pandemic, so it provides good ammunition, because since the pandemic, we haven't been able to do hardly any sort of inventory work because things are so disruptive in terms of the parklets and everything else. One of the things they did was they looked at traffic data, accident reports for the previous 10 years. And so these maps going from Walcott on this end over to Churchill on this end shows the pedestrian accidents in yellow and the bicycle crashes in green, which is not a remarkable number for a 10-year period, but you can see how they cluster around Willow and Cedar and Walnut and especially Teller. I think what's most surprising about this, what's most surprising to me, is I always thought that this area around Churchill Street was probably the most dangerous part of Main Street. Everybody always thinks that because it's on a curve and it's got this weird angled intersection. No accidents there reported. Out of those accidents, 73% were at intersections. So it's not, the bulk of them are sort of turning incidents, in particular left turns. Almost all of them were left turn pedestrian crashes, or crashes involving pedestrians. And the other major contributor, but it was a minority amount, was people walking out between in parked cars. So you can see the traffic volumes on Main Street are relatively low. People always complain about parking and traffic congestion, and those are the complaints that the Main Street Access Committee tends to hear. Speeding, but if you look at the numbers are relatively low for Main Street. In fact, it's too low for sort of a business district. Generally speaking, you want to have a certain amount of traffic. It helps slow cars, number one, and you want a lot of passersby looking at your storefronts if you're in business. So the number here is, the peak number in 2019 was 6774. And just by comparison, Fishkill has over 15,000 cars at annual average daily traffic, and Wappingers Falls has 13,000 plus.
I find that a little bit unusual because when I am on Main Street during the weekends, it does seem very congested. People seem to get very impatient. I've had people yell at me because I was stopping to parallel park.
Yeah.
Had a guy roll down his window and tell me I was on a thoroughfare and I needed to keep moving. Couldn't pull into a space. I see people. One of the things I see on Main Street that scares me is people getting frantic to get to a space. They see a space, they're racing towards it, or they're doing a U-turn to get to it, either on Tironda or Main Street. It's that kind of like, bad decisions driven by hurry up and find the parking spot.
Yeah. So.
Are we so low during the work week that's what's creating that average?
Usually the average daily is measured on a work day.
Yeah, because during the week, it can be a ghost town, but on the
Yeah.
weekends, it's dangerous and congested.
Right. Well, we also looked at all the accumulated traffic studies that were done before the pandemic for the 5 years between the pandemic and in the 5 years before that, to see level of service issues, to see if there were backed up. And many of those look like Saturday as well as a peak hour on Saturday as well as peak hour on typical weekday. And what they found almost across the board, actually across the board, was the level of service on Main Street was A and B, almost nothing in terms of delay. And generally speaking, you don't want to see, it's not recommended to have A and B level of service on Main Street because that just means people are cruising on through rather than being held up and saying, oh, that's a new store, maybe I'll go to that restaurant tonight or whatever. You want a certain amount of congestion in order to slow people down, especially on our Main Street, because there's very few reasons to stop if it's not congested. There's only 2 lights on Main Street, 3 if you count the dummy light, and no stop signs. So once you get around the corner at Cross there, you can cruise on through as if you hit the light. And like you say, people tend to speed up at lights rather than slow down because they want to beat if it's green, they want to make sure they get through before it turns red. The only level of service C on Main Street was westbound at Walcott. So it's getting off Main Street at the Route 9D. And the only measured one that I found at level of service D was Tioronda at Saturday peak hour, trying to get out onto Main Street.
It's a very difficult place to see down Main Street when you're turning from Tioronda out onto Main Street because of the parked cars.
Yes. So,
John, what do the levels mean? A, B, C, D?
well, it's A through F. A means there's hardly any delay at an intersection, less than 10 seconds. And F means it's a long delay, maybe 2 cycles of light or over 80 seconds worth of delay at a traffic signal. That's sort of the general. You can correct me if I'm wrong, Stark.
No, yeah, that's all correct.
So at any rate, at least from the measurements, there's not a capacity problem. There's not too much volumes on Main Street. There's not too much delays on Main Street, except in extraordinary peak hours, which are on weekends and when it's tourist time, rather than from average daily residential and business type traffic. But there is an issue with speed. We've seen that. There are accidents. Out of those 30 accidents over the 10-year, 2 were serious injury, and then we just had a fatality here on Main Street. So that's, gets everybody's attention, and you want to try to deal with speed and safety, even if there aren't capacity volumes or peak problems that are extraordinary.
The other issue I've noticed is that on the weekends, because what's Main Street speed limit? Is it 30? It's 30 miles per hour. So when you're on a bicycle, there's not enough room in the lane for you, and cars want to speed around you because generally, you could almost keep up. You could almost keep up with the speed of traffic if the speed limit was slowed down a little bit, and it wouldn't be such an issue where people would be trying to pass you all the time. There's not enough really room between parked cars and the traffic lanes for bicyclists to be being passed constantly by cars. And so as a result, I try not to bike on Main Street on the weekends after 10 or 11 a.m. It's basically a...
So speed is an issue. And you can see by the graph at the top or the chart at the top, it makes a really big difference in terms of pedestrian injuries and deaths. So if you're hit by a car at 20 miles an hour, a typical car, higher if it's an SUV than if it's a sedan, but on average, 10% of people die in 20 mile an hour crashes. And it goes up to 40% at 30 miles an hour and 80% at 40 miles an hour. So there's a real incentive to keep people driving slowly. I just went from Bank Square to Fountain Square And it takes less than 4 minutes to go the whole length of Main Street. And yet people have to speed. I don't know why, they're not gaining any significant amount. That's it going at 20 miles an hour, 4 minutes. So it's not like you're gaining 10 minutes by going faster.
Right.
It's impossible. So around the country, many cities are looking at a 20-mile-an-hour speed limit under the banner 20 is plenty. And Portland, Oregon, Norfolk, Virginia, Denver, a slew of cities are lowering the speed limits, especially in business districts. So that's one of the recommendations of the Access Committee, is to take it down from what it is currently now, 25 to 20, and to put up signs so people know that it's 20. Another way of dealing with traffic calming is to narrow the lanes. Now, Beacon has relatively narrow lanes already, but it's inconsistently narrow. So in some cases, like this block, which I show at the top, at Rite Aid there, it's 9 feet 2, which is really too narrow, you know, and so there's a lot of complaints about clipped mirrors in those really narrow sections. And then in other areas, it's up to 11 feet or close to 11 feet, which is too wide. So what they've done is they've uniformly started 8-foot parking spaces on both sides. So the lanes get narrower and wider, but the parking lane stays the same. And what we've suggested is to do the exact opposite, to set a narrow, consistent lane for Main Street that's not too wide but not too narrow. And we picked the number 10 foot 2. And then you vary the width of the parking lanes in order to make that consistent lane width. So another traffic calming thing is put something in the middle, you know, but on a narrow lane, you can't really do that. You can't put bike lanes in, you can't put in chicanes or other sorts of deviations to try to slow people down. You do have the dummy light on East Main Street. That's a great calming influence, or could be, except that intersection is extraordinarily wide. And so, you know, it's 46 feet from where that crosswalk should be. There's no crosswalk there, but it's 46 feet across, an extra 10 or 15 feet over what you really want. So one of the recommendations is to redesign East Main Street intersection completely and put in big curb extensions and a crosswalk across there, and to make this a three-way stoplight. So the light would blink red in all directions, and everybody would come up, establish eye contact with pedestrians, with motorists at the other edge, and then proceed. So that you wouldn't have people trying to dart out between, you know, people in the street jaywalking or crossing at what should be a crosswalk. So there's a whole design in the report on how this should be redesigned.
Is there any talk of getting rid of the dummy light?
No.
Good.
There's only 2 of them in the entire state of New York. It's a historic landmark, and
I heard in the country.
I've seen the one up in Canajoharie or wherever it is. I think it's only in New York State there's 2 of them. There's probably more. Another way is curb extensions. Now the city is in the process of finishing up that project, and hopefully when it's paved, it'll look a lot better than the way it is. But you can see on the top, that's a favorite place for trucks to park during delivery, as in the no parking zones at the intersections where the stripes are. And so the curb extensions eliminate that real blockage of visibility of pedestrians and cars coming out from side streets. The curb extensions will prevent that from happening. It'll shorten up the crosswalks, it'll reduce speeds. Anything that creates a sense of side friction. That's what traffic calming is really about. It's about unconsciously slowing people down because there's enough feeling of tightness and threat that they naturally slow down. So you can put all the speed limits you want, because enforcement is never going to be perfect. It's never going to be close to perfect, it seems. But if you do certain traffic calming action, it naturally slows people down to where they abide by the speed limit without knowing it.
This is a little bit off that topic, but I wanted to point out that those, along Main Street, there are several intersections where there are, that middle picture, the one-way sign, the one-way arrow sign to
Yep.
the left is mounted on 2 poles,
Yeah,
and it's like right in the path of pedestrians if they're going straight and not taking that angled crosswalk. And there are several, it seems like an unnecessary obstacle, plus the sign is low. So somebody could just walk right into it. And I'm wondering why it was designed that way.
I can't say that for sure,
Do you
one
know?
way or the other, but the point being is that the crosswalks will be relocated when they're restriped, so that they won't be where that sign is.
No, but the sign is placed still so that, I mean, it's
Yeah.
like right in the path of pedestrian traffic. It's like, as a pedestrian, it strikes me, as just somebody put it there who's totally who just like doesn't walk.
Yeah. Well, there has to be, one-way signs are sort of a real critical safety sign, and I think they have
Yeah,
to
for
be
sure.
within so many feet of the intersections.
Yeah.
I see if it was 3 feet to the left, it would probably be better for everybody. So I didn't have any signs of what this will look like once they put in but I picked up a slide from Great Barrington, Massachusetts, so you can see how curb extensions shorten the crosswalks and create a sort of real high visibility for pedestrians at corners. And the bold, what's called continental crosswalks, sort of Abbey Road stripes, provide the best way of marking crosswalks that also prevent cars from picking up the paint too easily, because they have parallel spaces for the tires to go. Street trees and on-street parking are also considered traffic calming. Anything that gives you a sense of enclosure. So taller buildings are a traffic calming device if they're close enough to the sidewalks. Certainly street trees, on-street parking definitely. So anything that gives that side friction will help naturally slow people down. Not everybody, not 100%, but the vast majority of people drive slower when there's a sense of narrowness about the street.
What about those like small, I wouldn't really call them bollards, but they're basically little stick-ups that are often like in the center of a pedestrian walkway
Yeah.
that have a sign on them saying, it's an admonition that you have to yield to pedestrians.
Yeah, generally those are put where the traffic calming measures,
Yeah.
the street's designed poorly, so you put up a sign to try to correct it.
Okay.
Like in Wappingers Falls, the lanes are really wide, or in Village of Fishkill, the lanes are too wide, and so they put those things in the middle to try to slow people down because they naturally want to go fast because the lanes are wide. In Beacon, there's no room for those, which is a good thing. They tried them and they kept getting knocked over.
Okay.
Usually like DPW does not, DPWs like don't like them. I think in Albany, they don't allow them
Yeah.
because they just get run over.
They're real maintenance issues. Now,
Yeah.
another thing that the committee is considering, and these are the sort of tougher choices that are obviously not going to be left up to the access committee. They're going to be part of the city council and public discussion. But you can slow people down with raised crosswalks or mid-block crosswalks, or even raised intersections in which you ramp up slowly. They're not like a speed bump. They're a very shallow ramp coming into them. You bring up the intersection to the level of the curb, so instead of pedestrians have to ramp and wheelchair users having to ramp down to the street, the cars ramp up to the intersection. And at the corners, you have bollards to protect the corners, but it's a straight walk across, which gives everybody less trip hazards for pedestrians. And cars got motors. They can get up those ramps easy enough, but it does give enough of a textural and grade change that you feel it. And so when you come to that intersection, instead of having a traffic light, which encourages you to speed and encourages you to look up while you speed rather than look for pedestrians, because you're looking at the light to see if it's going to turn yellow and whether you have to hit on your brakes. So you're looking at the light as opposed to looking at the pedestrian crosswalk. The raised intersections, the raised crosswalks provide that slowdown without distracting people's attention. They're actually focused on the ramp coming up and the striping rather than looking somewhere else.
Which cities has that been implemented in, do you know?
The one on the bottom is a proposal for Lark Street in Albany. I'm not familiar with Lark Street, but I pulled it offline. There's a lot of raised crosswalks in the country, not as many raised intersections, because they're more expensive. But if the city wanted to do them, now would be the time to do them, because they just stuck in all those ramps up the curb extensions, so they probably wouldn't. But for instance, the committee recommended a mid-block crosswalk near the Beacon Theater, where that intersection is with the parking lot on Van Nydak, because that's a long block, and people build up speed there because the lanes are a little wider there. So you could have a mid-block crosswalk there at that intersection with the access to the parking lot in the rear. And then there's always the stop signs. The committee recommended stop signs on all corners within 2 blocks of Main Street. There's sort of a hit and miss pattern on the side streets around Main Street. So some are 2-way, some are 4-way, and it's very confusing. Some people blow by them, and others are expecting people to stop. It's kind of dangerous. So the easiest way to deal with it is make them all stop signs. There were even several intersections where there was no stop sign at Main Street, which made no sense. So at Willow Street and Skank, there were no stop signs, so people would be able to sort of cruise right in. So we recommended stop signs at any intersection street with Main Street. And then throwing out a consideration of having a stop sign or 2 along Main Street in the straightaways. So at, say, Elm Street or Willow Street, before people could build up a head of steam coming around those corners and out towards the light. Put a stop sign in, an all-way stop sign, maybe at Willow where people have a hard time coming out. It's a 2-way street where there's traffic actually coming onto Main Street as opposed to going away from it. You could have a 3-way stop there, and that would slow people down and build up that momentum. There's a big debate about stop signs as whether they're appropriate as a traffic calming measure, because people don't always stop at them, they sort of roll through them. But even rolling through them is better than blowing through when there's no stop sign. And then the final suggestion was...
Oh, sorry, can I just make a quick comment about stop signs at intersections? A place where I feel vulnerable as a pedestrian is when when the street is going the same direction on either side of Main Street, and I have to cross, I think it's like Elm Street, I think is like that. So I have to cross Elm Street, and if there's a break in Main Street traffic, somebody trying to cross is just going to zip across really fast and not necessarily see the pedestrian in the crosswalk, especially when they're trying to get to that gas station. So
it's true. So there might be a couple side streets in which an all-way stop sign might be appropriate to allow side traffic to come in. So people like Willow is a 2-way street. There are very few 2-way intersections with Main Street. Tioronda is another one. Skank is another one. So they're just throwing that out as consideration. And then finally, the last one is leading pedestrian intervals. That's a technique where you give the pedestrians a head start, something like 3 to 4 or 5, 6 seconds before the light turns green, so that the pedestrians have a chance to get past the first lane and get out there where people can see them to avoid the left turners. That's recommended for Teller, certainly, and maybe for Chestnut as well, where there are traffic signals. The idea, you could also replace Chestnut with a all-way stop sign, which, again, people with traffic lights, there's too many accidents at traffic lights where people blow through them. They either speed through them or they miss them because they're looking somewhere else at a storefront or something, and then you have serious issues. So those are sort of the things on the table. None of this has been decided. This is just sort of a draft reporting stage at this point. All of these have been interim recommendations to the council and will be incorporated into the summary report of suggestions. And again, fully vetted with the public before anything's decided.
Just to weigh in, there's a good resource, the FHWA. If you just Google traffic calming primer, there's a good website that comes up that has multiple modules, but one that's very helpful is a toolbox that kind of lists other traffic calming measures and gives you kind of engineering metrics for them, as well as some case studies and examples. So,
FHWA?
yep, the FHWA, Federal Highway Administration.
Yeah, the only comment I'd make is that if you, if you've experienced other more urban and older environments, a lot of them that don't have a lot of highway, automobile architecture, the automobile-centered signage, lights that are more pedestrian-oriented, even though they allow automobiles, are naturally safer because, like that, the curve at Churchill, people's attentions are more focused when they're in situations where there aren't highway scale or high-speed automobile-oriented things like signage and lights, like you were saying. So one of the things you might want to think about is focusing on the pedestrian experience as opposed to the automotive signage and lighting and all that, which also tends to put people in a frame of mind that they're in a pedestrian environment with a car rather than an automotive environment that pedestrians are unsafely also in.
Yeah, I think the raised intersection is the best example of that, where
Right.
you create sort of a pedestrian priority place. And the cars are allowed to go through, but they have to have a little inconvenience to do so.
So I guess it's a little bit past 7:30, so we have to move on and open our regular meeting. And I'm going to need a little bit of assistance with this, because with,
First item is the minutes, the meeting
right.
minutes.
So, and I wasn't present last time, so I won't be voting on accepting the minutes, but does anybody have any comments on the minutes from last month?
And were the rest of the 4 members of the board present today, present last month? Yeah, everybody was here last month. Okay. I just want to make sure we have a sufficient number to pass them.
So, any comments on last month's minutes?
I have no comments.
No.
Done.
Motion to accept the January minutes?
Motion?
Seconded.
Second. All in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
Thank you.
Okay, and the next matter on the agenda is 364 Main Street.
Great, so do we need to reopen the public meeting, or has it been open?
It has been open. It's a continued public hearing. You don't have to make a formal motion to kind of reopen
Restart,
the hearing.
yeah.
It is open. It was open at the last meeting and continues to be open.
Okay.
So I would just announce that particular agenda item and ask the applicant to address any changes.
Okay, great. Yeah, so the first agenda item is to continue the public hearing on applications for a subdivision, lot merger approval, and site plan approval, 3-story mixed-use residential commercial development, 364 Main Street, submitted by O'Donnell. So applicant would like to update us on changes since last month's?
Please, Acting Chairman Warner, members of the board. For the record, Taylor Palmer with the law firm of Cuddy and Fader on behalf of the applicant. Tonight I am joined by our project architect, R.A. Siegel, as well as our traffic consultant, Rich DeAndre of Collier's Engineering. As the Acting Chairman stated, we are before you for our in connection with our continued site plan and subdivision public hearings for the redevelopment of 364 Main Street and the Elias Street property. Just by way of brief update, we did submit a supplemental submission to your board dated January 11th, and we did prepare dated January 25th, that included further refinements to the updated building design. It did also include a work back for the 4 feet we lost on the frontage. We've now worked that into the design to help expand and activate that street frontage along Main Street, so that RA will speak more specifically to how he was able to work that into the building design for the project. Additionally, the planting bed that's situated along the Salvation Army property has been extended to be flush with the building. That was a recommendation by Mr. Clark and discussed with the board at the last meeting. It also discourages vehicles from parking in that specific entry to the site off of Main Street. It's also requested by the board. We did incorporate the benches into the to the frontage design, and we did reincorporate bike racks that had gotten lost in the process. And we did also add some more design to the landscaped front area of the property. The landscaping calculation was also updated. RA will speak to, I guess, an error between the update to the plan as far as the building, the commercial square footage. So I know that was a clarification that needed to be reconciled, so RA will touch that in just a minute. So the actual square footage for the commercial space is 8,892 and not the 10,000 number that was cited in the letter. It was a hangover from the actual table itself rather than the plans. Just some other quick updates. We did add some amenity space to the roof. That was another request by the board. We are activating it for the potential for solar, so we're putting those elements in play, again, from a recommendation from the board. The application is now actively before your ARB subcommittee. I know they'll be meeting again with you on Friday for continued review, but there's been substantial changes to the facades, not just on Main Street, but as it's seen, on the sides of the building. And we did incorporate the removal of two storefront doors on Main Street. And on the side facade, there was some discussion about modifying those to be more consistent. So I would just say, before I turn it over to RA, one hot off the press note. We've discussed this through our prior meetings, but we did finally receive this morning at 7 a.m. a response from Beacon Natural Market. We got an email from LT Sherpa, one of the co-owners there at the Beacon Natural Market, indicating that prior communications from our client, Sean O'Donnell, were from his wife, Dawn O'Donnell, and they weren't sure of the name difference and hadn't responded. So in any event, their email noted that they are amenable to this agreement, meaning a lease easement agreement to access the rear of their building. So we've asked for them to have a meeting with us next week to go through any details associated with that. As you know, the applicant is already committed to putting a note on the plan, regardless of if we heard back from the owners of Beacon Natural Market, but we now have officially, and we know we're during the public hearing, so if they're not here this evening, we're able to represent back to you that they did communicate with us and are interested in that, and the applicant is pursuing that and setting a meeting with them for next week. So with that, I will turn to RA just to go through some of the more visual updates. And of course, we can address any comments. And we do have our traffic consultant here to speak to Crete Manning's update comments, so we'll provide those as well.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Good evening. So Taylor touched on most of the points that I was going to make. Thank you. But the main thing is that we did take another look at that front plaza, and what I did was I pushed back the storefronts and paved up to the new storefront line to gain back that space that we lost on the last rendition, and then also changed the paving as it comes towards the sidewalk on Main Street, so that it curves out, gains some additional paving that we didn't have before, and then curves back in to meet the line of the adjacent mosque building, because we were talking about that. We didn't want to make it an abrupt step, so it curves back that way. So basically, we have more landscaping and paving in that front plaza than we had in the original scheme. So that was the major change there. There was a note from John Clark about we need to adjust the planter right across from the existing street tree because the pedestrian clearway is pinched at that point. And then I was just wondering, because the zoning says that you're allowed to have less than 8 feet if if there's site conditions. So I'm just wondering what the board thinks about that. If you want us to adjust the planter, or if there's a way to work around that, the 5-foot length of the tree grate and leave that design the way it is.
Well, the code says a pedestrian clearway at least 8 feet wide with unobstructed space for pedestrian activity shall be provided along the sidewalk unless site conditions require a narrower clearway. So under existing conditions, there's something that's impossible to avoid, you can go for less than 8.
Right.
But in this case, you have room for 8. It's just where you locate that planter box.
Okay, so we can make that
So it seems to me
adjustment,
you
yeah.
can shorten the planter box so that it provides that 8-foot clearance.
Right.
Rather than extend it out to the tree well.
Right. Okay. Yeah, so we'll make that adjustment for the next one, but,
Yeah.
but yeah, and those were the main changes. We did look at having roof access, having solar panels on the roof. We're also adjusting the landscape design for this new plaza layout, and we'll get more information from the landscaper on the roof planting as well, and that deck layout. But we just wanted to acknowledge that we're going to be doing that. And then, as Taylor mentioned, we met with the ARB subcommittee after the last planning board meeting, and we have another scheduled meeting with them on Friday to review additional progress.
Let's start with you, Johnson. Do you have the mic?
The only other thing I'll mention is the lighting. There used to be a light out by the Eliza Street exit or entrance, and that disappeared somewhat for some reason. And it seems to me you need to have a lighting fixture, a light pole out on that near that entrance to the parking lot on the west side, unless you can demonstrate there's enough light from the street light to make it viable. And I also thought that you should look at lighting along the eastern sidewalk leading up to that side entrance. There's no light at the entrance, and that sidewalk may be far enough back from the street lighting in which you're getting into some sort of murky territory at night. So the eastern sidewalk and the Eliza Street entrance seems to me you should look at for additional lighting possibilities.
Okay.
Other than that, I think we're, other than the architectural review subcommittee work, the site plan's looking better from my perspective. And I think the space out front looks much more usable. The only question I have is about pavers, the seam between pavers and the concrete sidewalk. Sometimes that can be a maintenance issue and a trip problem. So you're going to have to sort of guarantee that edge of the pavers isn't somewhere in the middle of the sidewalk that you're likely to settle out in, future rainstorms or whatever and cause a problem.
Okay.
From a traffic standpoint, the only outstanding comment that we had was regarding the loading zone. I believe Mr. Buckley had weighed in on that, saying that a loading zone is not required. And then the comments that we had brought up in our recent letter have been addressed given the square footage discrepancy. The site still only requires 38 parking spaces, which they meet. They are actually in surplus of with 42. And there will be no changes to the trip generation based on that square footage. So we have no further comments from a traffic standpoint.
John?
So as Mr. Clark had commented on the lighting, we had some comments on that. We are also asking that the plans be updated to actually show the utility poles that are running through the parcel on the south side of Eliza Street, and questioning as to whether are there any utility easements for those poles in that run. We want to know if there's any impacts or conflicts with what you're proposing in that easement, if it does exist. The rest of them are just basically clean up on some of the construction details and utilities they've got.
Okay, let's go around the board.
So I think the site plan is definitely an improvement. I haven't seen the elevations of the changed facade yet, but I guess those will be coming after you meet with the ARB?
Yeah.
Okay. I agree with John Clark. I think the joint, between the sidewalk and the pavers is kind of like a critical detail.
Speak up a little bit.
Critical detail to manage. I like the seating in front of the building, and perhaps there's an opportunity to expand the planting that's on the west corner, out towards the sidewalk a little bit, to make more of a space for the tables between, separation between the entrance into the addition and the seating area in front of the building. But overall, I think it's looking better.
Yeah, I agree. The landscaping in the front of the building, it's a big improvement. And I still don't understand what's happening in the rear. There's some sort of ramp, and the building overhangs. It's hard to tell because it seems like it's drawn differently. It's not coordinated. I wasn't sure what that was about. There was if you
scroll up.
Yeah, it's not shown very clearly, but there's a walkway and a grade change between the handicap parking and that rear of the building.
Yeah, there's a grade change. Yeah, basically the building is overhanging over the parking, above the first floor, and
Okay.
so that parking is covered but not enclosed, and the
building perimeter.
that sidewalk comes in, between the parking and the face of the building at the first floor.
Yeah, the only thing I was concerned about is that accessible. Are those accessible spaces still? Are they going to have to transit through the traffic routes in order to get in?
Basically, that's why those ramps are there, because they'll come straight off of the handicap transfer zone.
Okay.
To a flat area, and then it ramps down from there, just to catch the grade into the building, because we're working with an existing floor elevation. But,
Okay.
yeah, I'll have the site civil guy clarify that.
But the other spaces have like a small retaining wall.
Yeah, or a high curb, yeah.
Okay. Which is hard to understand.
Mhm.
And, yeah.
Are we talking, can we also comment on that EAF form right now that was in the package? Because I think, I was scanning through everything, and I think that section D2 is still written as if there is no excavated material being taken off-site. And I would imagine for the expansions of the building, there's going to be excavation for foundation, and I don't think that can be, unless you tell me so, I don't think that material is going to be reused on-site. But if you look at the wording, I think it's still, D2 is still checked off as,
Yeah, but basically, if you read right under it, in parentheses, it says not including general site preparation, grading, or installation of utilities or foundations.
yeah, but isn't there another clause that says as long as the material is going to be used on-site? Or did I misread it?
Where all excavated materials made, right, so, you're right.
Yeah, because it's not,
Yeah.
stuff's going off-site, right? So it's got to be quantified, I think it requires that they quantify the amount of material to be removed, and then,
Yeah, let me just confirm that with the engineer and make sure he's not planning to use it somewhere, and then
Yeah.
we can make that adjustment.
As a practical matter, you adopted your neg deck last month, so the EAF is the tool that you use to make your secret determination, which you did last month. I think it's good that we make sure that the records are accurate for the files. So it would be helpful to get an answer to that question to make sure that the document that's in our files is accurate. But that tool won't be used
Okay.
going forward.
Mhm.
What is Grass Crete?
Hmm?
What is Grass Crete?
Oh, it's those pavers, like.
Like a dia?
Yeah, where the grass grows through that. So we're just trying to add to the landscaping. We're not taking credit for all that, but it adds to the feeling of the landscaping there.
Okay. It's kind of hard for me to read how the front of the building will work in terms of how it interacts with the sidewalk, because without seeing the elevations.
Right.
So the doors,
You can't walk on it.
are those the inset areas or the protruding areas?
The storefronts are the inset areas, and that's where the doors would be.
So it's 3 storefronts plus the one on the west?
Yeah, but there's only there's only doors in the central one here. You can see it on the plan here. There's doors in the central one, and then the others are just storefront glass.
So it'll be, the central one will be where the arrows are, that's where the doors are?
Yeah.
Yeah, I guess I'm gonna reserve more comments till I see more of the elevations. This is an improvement, definitely.
Yeah, that's kind of what we were talking about at the subcommittee, ARB meeting, that we would get that more clarified and then bring it back to the full board.
And also the building extension over the handicap parking and the other parking in back. I'm curious to see how that looks. Is it on, like, are there columns or posts? Or
Yeah,
is it
there's columns there, yeah.
And also, because you have extra parking, what were the numbers again, John?
We needed 38 and we have 42.
42, so there's 4 extra.
4 extra spaces. They're gonna, if the natural market would have an easement or an access to the rear.
Sean, could you use the mic for you, if you don't mind? Use the mic. Thank you.
So they have 4 extra spaces at this point. 38 is required, they have 42. They may lose a couple of those if the natural market cuts a deal for a rear access.
Okay.
They would
Okay.
lose at least 2 of those.
Okay, yeah, I would say not, the less pavement, the better. That's kind of how I feel about it. Okay.
Yeah, I agree that the area sidewalk has improved a lot, and appreciate that. I also agree that there's a potential for a tripping hazard if, obviously if the joint isn't done well because it's a curved condition, but I'm sure that you'll look into that. I did just want to clarify the setback, the 4-foot setback of the storefront area. That will be, is that in line with the existing setback, the existing building that's
Yeah, that brick area.
that break
Yeah.
in the front of the building?
Mhm.
So, and the overhang will be aligned with the existing structure that's
Yeah,
closer to the
right.
street?
Yeah,
So that's,
because that way he can maintain his foundation, but we're back to the line that we were at, with
right, so the
other-
projecting, like, 4 areas will be structural?
Mhm.
Right. Yes, I don't really have any further comments, but I agree that the curved area is going to be perceived as, part of the old sidewalk, so it has to be done in a way that doesn't cause any confusion, I guess.
Yeah, I think
Looks
it's
much
it's
better.
actually the way it exists now. There's some planting that comes out and actually probably chokes down the sidewalk more, so you have,
4 feet.
yeah.
It's only 4 feet now between the tree well, which has a big tree in it that's right up against the edge of the well, and the current curb line where the landscape green area is. So this will be a big improvement on that.
Mm.
Now, it won't be the curve will come out to their property line, but you'll still have 8 clearance between the curb and the curve, the apex of the curve. So there is another lamppost in there too, further down on the west, but you'll have 8-foot clearance if you get around the tree well at 8 feet.
Right.
No further comments?
Okay, thank you. My comments are consistent pretty much with everybody about the board, so I'm not going to repeat them with respect to time. Jennifer, real quick on this one. When we were on the call earlier, you had mentioned an option that we could do. If you don't mind repeating that, what the items are still open for this particular?
Yeah, I think we hit all of the items.
Okay.
So, yeah, I think we hit all of the open items. You've gone through everybody's review memos. I think that as far as procedure goes, you're currently in a public hearing. You've heard tonight that the applicant intends to provide an updated landscaping plan, lighting plan, some more information, including the elevations once the applicant finishes with the ARB subcommittee. So I would recommend continuing the public hearing because you are going to be receiving new information. And then the only question left is whether you feel that you're at a point where by the next meeting, the applicant will have crossed all the Ts, dotted all the Is in a way that would allow you to close the public hearing and adopt a resolution. And in that case, you could direct my office to prepare a resolution for your next meeting. That doesn't mean you have to act on it, but you'd have the draft available if you were at that point.
Let me just go around the board real quick and see how you feel about that.
About what?
About just going ahead with, are you comfortable that everything will be pretty much taken care of by our next meeting?
No.
Okay. Just get a feel.
Yeah, not at all.
Yeah, I think we have more, until we get a feel of where things are going with the architectural review, it's too early to say that.
Okay, that's fine. I just wanted to just see where we are. So can I have a motion to continue the public hearing on this? And we'll see you next.
Motion.
Seconded.
All in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
Opposed?
I'm sorry, that was Karen and
Jill.
If I may only briefly, Acting Chairman, just if the public were invited to speak for today, just so they if they're here to comment on the application. I don't know that the public has spoken.
Thank you very much.
Yep,
Is
sorry.
anybody here from the public to speak on this? Thank you.
Good evening. My name is Stash Jankowski. I want to preface my remarks by saying that I believe that building is way too massive, too huge, too long, especially considering the green space next door with the Salvation Army. Please don't be swayed by the malarkey that the very capable lawyer has said in following what the developer wants, is that the developer is being very generous, very considerate of the community by only creating 3 stories instead of 4, which he originally planned. He would not be allowed to have 4 stories because of the HDLO designation of the building next door, the Salvation Army building. Also, I think that he's giving you a bunch of malarkey about eliminating that east driveway. I strongly advocate you all do that. Cars can go to Eliza Street. They can get in through the back lot off of Eliza Street and get to the back of the building. They do not need to go up that driveway. If you eliminate that driveway, you'll have a lot more green space. You'll be able to plant some nice tall trees to shade the building itself, give some more character to the building. The sidewalk can still be there. You don't have to worry about pedestrians interacting with cars on that sidewalk if it's all grass. You can also eliminate that ugly guardrail and replace it with a nice fence along the lot. John Clark said that perhaps you need some kind of something to hang your hat on to be able to eliminate that driveway. I found something in the code, chapter 45, 7, that says the city planning board may adopt rules and regulations in respect to any subject matter over which it has jurisdiction under this article or any other statute. I think that might give you the right to say, get rid of that driveway. Also, there's a very critical scenario I want to give you, and I find it very amazing that the discussion at the beginning was about traffic and accidents and people actually being hit by cars. So let me give you this scenario. There's a driver that's very anxious to get into that driveway, to get into the back of the building. He's going from west to east, and there's a whole line of traffic coming from east to west, a whole bunch of cars. He's sitting there, he's getting jittery. There's a car parked on the east side of the driveway, another one on the west side. It kind of eliminates a good view of people walking. Many times I had to stop just to make sure people crossed across that driveway. So to continue in my scenario, there's a young lady with a carriage, a baby inside the cart, and a little girl next to it. They are going from west to east. On the east side is a lady with a little dog. So these people are walking. The driver sees a break in the traffic. He says, oh my God, here's my chance to get into that driveway. Just as he floors it to turn left, and John did say there's a lot of accidents, people turning left, just as that car turns left, the little girl sees the dog and runs across the driveway. I don't need to continue to tell you what might happen. That is very, very critical. It's a very dangerous driveway. And along with all that green space, we wouldn't have to worry about the 10% rule or anything. So again, I urge you just to eliminate that driveway. Thank you.
Thank you.
I just found out about this.
Could you use the mic, identify yourself if you don't mind?
I'm Kim.
Kim
I'm
from?
a resident in town. I just literally found out about this the other day, and I'm surprised. I'm just shocked and surprised that this is still going on. With the concerns and fears of so many of the residents, the majority of residents
if
in
you
this
pull the mic,
town.
yeah, there you go.
The residents in this town over the canyonization of Main Street, that we continue to do this. We continue to allow this. I just can't believe that I'm sitting in a meeting over another block, literal block of vistas and view sheds in our town, that we're quibbling over planters and light fixtures. I'm shocked.
I agree with all of that. I reviewed the updated submissions package with this application and found it still does not show any significant changes from the previous suggestions at your last meeting. I don't want to look at drawings of a proposed parking lot in the back that we already know will be insufficient. I want to know how this project owner and the city are going to guarantee the safety of pedestrians and residents walking on Main Street sidewalks being encroached upon and cut off by incoming cars, delivery trucks, emergency vehicles, and all forms of traffic that will flow into that entrance off of Main Street. But what strikes me most is the lack of references. Where are the renderings that would show this generic big box next to the other buildings that surround this parcel? Where are the required streetscape visuals so we can see exactly how this large development will overpower the neighborhood historic buildings? This project, as proposed, will negatively impact Beacon's historic post office built during Roosevelt's New Deal projects. This is a gross overbuilt in this location. It's bad enough that 344 was allowed to be built, but that does not mean we need to mirror it with some more ugly. This city needs a formal architectural review board and not an architectural review subcommittee. Putting more stuff up on the roof brings us back to the look of a fourth floor with visual clutter. Please do not approve this lot merger and site plan. Thank you.
Anyone else from the public? Give the applicant a chance to respond.
Thank you, Acting Chairman. Just one note, there was a reference that the fourth story would not be permitted on this building because it's adjacency to the historic district overlay. It's not located in the city's historic district overlay, but it would just be a special permit review by the city council. It would just change the reviewing agency. The three-story building as proposed isn't as of right use in the district.
Thank you.
Thank you.
And Randall, can I just clarify? We do
Yeah.
have a formal ARB. The planning board is the ARB. We formed the subcommittee to try to move the review along. The subcommittee reports back to the full board. The full board, as the ARB, makes the determination on the architecture.
Thank you.
I just want to clarify that for the record.
So we already have a motion to continue the public hearing. We got more information coming from you. We'll see it. The public will be here and comment. I would respectfully say, listen to the citizens, and what
Absolutely.
they're saying and their concerns, and see how we could address them.
Great.
All right. Thank you very much. Appreciate it. Thanks, everybody.
Randall, just to be clear, the applicant is going to prepare streetscape renderings.
Okay.
So hopefully we'll have them for the next meeting.
Right, so we'll have those after the ARB meeting, but we will have them for your next meeting.
So you'll have them after the
Yes,
ARB
at
meeting?
the full board
Okay,
meeting.
got
Yep.
it. Okay, thank you. Thank you. We're going to move on to item number 3, continue review of application for site plan approval, hotel and event space, 1113 Walcott Avenue, submitted by Property Theater LLC.
Good evening again, Acting Chairman. For the record, Taylor Palmer with the law firm of Cuddy & Fader on behalf of the applicant. Tonight I am joined by R.A. Siegel, the architect, as well as Mike Bodendorf of Hudson Land Design, our project engineer, as well as our traffic consultant, Rich D'Andrea of Colliers. The owner and applicants are also here with us tonight. Just by way of brief update, after our January 11th meeting with you all, we did prepare a supplemental submission to your board dated January 25th, which included specific details about the updated loop drive. At the last meeting, we spent a good deal of time trying to discuss some of the options or alternatives, which we did explore, and REA and our respective consultants, and the applicant and our respective consultants will address or present to you briefly as far as what changes we tried to explore based on Mr. Clark's memo. In the meantime, just some other brief updates. The driveway has been narrowed as much as possible such that a shuttle bus can still navigate the accessway there, and delivery vehicles can still maneuver the proposed traffic loop that we have, the circulation loop that we have. We did, as far as the southerly walkway spur, we did remove that from the loop, and we did add additional plantings that have been incorporated into the design. We did change the paving to a brick paver to try and improve the relationship with the historic structures and the surrounding landscape. The sycamore tree, which we did discuss at the last meeting, is not going to be impacted by the design, any design associated with this. In a minute, as I mentioned, I'll turn it to Aria and Gavin to kind of walk through some of those other changes. This matter, as the previous matters, also now before your ARB subcommittee. Of course, again, all recommendations from your ARB subcommittee will be brought back to this board. They will also be meeting again to discuss continued review of this project on Friday. Of note, just some other brief updates. We're not in hearing on this application yet, but we have had a chance to, or the applicant has reached out to the owners of the adjoining buildings and properties. So we did reach out to the River Ridge Views Homeowners Association, and they did have a meeting also with the folks from West End, some folks that would come out based on some notices that were sent out from the West End Lofts project. So we do have some letters of support that we did receive from some residents in the West End Lofts that we'll submit. We'll resubmit those again at the time of the public hearing, but we just wanted to note that we are reaching out to the neighbors, and we're trying to get a lot of that input into the project so that it hopefully we'll have a good result when we get to the public hearings on this project. All right, and lastly, but not leastly, we did submit to the building department a request for 2 determinations. One, which we sort of already had the answer to, but we thought since we're there for all purposes, we'd seek a determination on the 1964 parking exception. That is just a provision in the code that says uses that existed in 1964 provide some level of exception as it relates to off-street parking. So we submitted that to Mr. Buckley for his office's review in connection with the planning board attorney. And we also sought an ultimate confirmation of exactly what parking relief we would need or require based on the present proposal. So those details are still being, I believe, reviewed by both the building department and Mr. Buckley. But we do, of course, want to meet with you all tonight as we're in the secret process to try and hopefully continue to hash out site circulation and those details, because zoning board, even if we end up going to them, won't be able to act on this project until your board completes the secret review process. They are an involved agency because we do require, at least as designed, some relief. We don't know the exact nature of that relief yet, but they are an involved agency in this process. So with that, I'll turn to Gavin to please just walk the board through some of our discussions about what we explored based on Mr. Clark's recommendations and really what's going to make this site really functional and effective for circulation purposes. Thank you.
Thanks, Taylor. I'm Gavin Hecker, and I'm just going to speak to some of the updates that we made on the site plan. First, I'm going to talk about, we added plantings to the southern boundary after a discussion with River Ridge, and we have ongoing discussions with River Ridge, but these new plantings create a complete privacy border from the River Ridge Department. We worked with our landscape architect, Deborah Adams, on that. So that's our first update. The next one is we were asked to have a survey done or actually locate the tombstones in the cemetery. And we've shown those on our new site plan here. Had a surveyor go through there. And this is where the trail will go through. And it avoids much of the tombs. And so that's our survey of the tombstones. So the other thing I wanted to mention was about the loop drive of the church. So as Taylor was saying, we narrowed the drive and from the last site plan that you saw. And so we took out the existing extension on the southern driveway. It used to go up to about where the sidewalk is in front of the church. And so we cut that off and just looped it around to the main drive and narrowed it. And it's a paver, which is, it should be historic to match the church. The reason why we want to have that is specifically for the drop-off for events, and this way it won't interfere with any hotel operations. So the way that we wanted to limit the availability of this drive is through this post and chain that's set up in front, so it actually won't be open most of the time. And we don't think that it's a fair assessment to say that it's going to become a parking lot. It's going to be shut off most of the time and just be allowed for event drop-off. And we did explore some of the options that the board had spoken about at our last meeting. And they're not feasible for the purpose of actually what the intended purpose of dropping off people at the event. So the one that suggested that would be a one-way behind the hotel would end up eliminating parking spots and just cause more traffic congestion. And then we also looked into a loop in front of the hotel, which would be too tight of a turning radius for anything larger than a car or maybe a small van. And either way, it wouldn't serve the purpose of dropping people off in front of the church, and it would probably cause more pedestrian traffic to get in the way of actual car traffic as well. So those are the reasons we want to, repropose this version of the narrow loop drive and with that functionality in mind. So that's about all I have to speak to at this point. All right, thanks.
Good evening. Just for the record, Rich D'Andrea from Colliers Engineering and Design. So I was just going to run through a couple of the updates on the traffic and parking end of things. So we had provided a revised or a response letter to the Crete and Manning's last round of comments in the most recent submission. One of the things, or one of the bigger things in that letter was about the credit that we were taking for non-vehicular or mass transit usage for both traffic and parking. So what we provided in our most recent submission was a what I call a sensitivity traffic analysis of all the intersections that we previously studied using a lower credit. We had previously used a credit of 25% on the trip generation and the parking. We looked at now a 10% credit on that end, which just to get an idea of how that changes the traffic and parking generation for the development and the impacts. When you look at the traffic end of things, there was no real significant change there. There's some minor increases in delays, but the recommendations of our study more or less stay the same. And then one of the other things just on traffic really is we were asked to make a submission to DOT of the traffic study, which we haven't done yet, but we will be doing this week to get that process moving. DOT, as you know, Walcott Avenue 9D is a DOT roadway in this section, so they will, any changes to the access and stuff like that will require a DOT permit to be issued from them. Going into some of the other items that we've updated on the parking, we were asked to provide some additional counts of the municipal parking lot right where we are right now during the daytime hours. We did do those additional counts to get an idea of a handle on what the actual utilization is in this parking lot. So that information is now in our study. Generally, during the daytime hours, there's about 20 vehicles available, parking spaces available based on what we saw. So that is another area of usage, although somewhat limited, that can be used during the daytime hours if there's an event, or just for the general operation of the facility. One of the other items that we were asked to provide, and we started looking at this, but we'll provide it more in the next submission, is the Tompkins lot and exactly how many parking spaces can actually be provided there. If you look at the figure that's shown here, we show 70 spaces. That's what we quoted in our traffic analysis, and that was based on some of the information that was provided in the Main Street Access Committee documentation. However, we're going to provide a more detailed sketch of what we think the parking layout could be. Based on preliminary analysis, it looks like we could probably get actually 66 spaces rather than 70. So that's going to change some of the numbers there a little bit, but not significantly. The most recent round of comments from Crete and Manning, there was some questions on how our parking calculations were done for the event period. We had identified, I think, 52 spaces would be required off-site, to accommodate the project during a peak event. And when you look at those, we had accounted for 4 people per hotel room in the hotel. And I agree that that's probably an overestimation. It's probably more like 2 people per hotel room. And the numbers that are actually required with all the credits that we've taken is actually 64 spaces to be accommodated off-site. So we will revise that and address that comment, and we'll update the study to reflect that. Obviously, what we're showing on the screen here is just a view of what parking is actually available in the area. We know we're providing the 31 spaces on site. We talked about the Tompkins lot, in which we think is going to be probably 66 spaces, what we're going to come out with if it was fully striped out. Obviously, the municipal lot is approximately 70 spaces realistically usable, because some of the spaces here are designated for police parking or other official parking, so they can't necessarily be used. And then there's also the 72 spaces that we know on Beekman Street, which our counts have shown are pretty readily available during most times of the day. So with all that parking, we do think that we have enough parking in the area to accommodate this, and we've tried to make some recommendations on how we can further reduce the parking requirements of the site. So, those are the things we've gone through. And then just one other thing that I wanted to mention was, I think there was a comment about, people may look to park on Academy Street because it's actually the closest location to this site. I don't know to me that's really realistic, because if you look at Academy Street, there's that wall that's right there at the end, that people coming down there, I'm not sure that people are gonna even, if you're a visitor to the site, you're gonna know that that's a viable location to even look for parking. If you're more local, maybe, but that's just something that was brought up and wanted to address, and happy to answer any other questions at this point.
And that, I think that's it for our presentation at this point. Certainly, we are here to address any comments. I know, again, the circulation on the site has been a comment that's here, and we're in the secret process, and it will ultimately, it could change things like the number of parking spaces we can provide off-site. For example, going around the parsonage, cutting through the back of the building, there are changes that could be implemented, or could be affected. So we're hoping to have a discussion with the board, at least as it relates to our proposal here. We think we've done a real workup of trying to address Mr. Clark and the board's concerns about the loop drive in the front of the existing church. Again, it's an existing driveway there today. We're not, we're closing off the loop in so creating it, but we're not creating a new condition in that location. We are trying to improve it with the brick pavers. As the applicant mentioned, we have a means of cutting it off. It's not going to be utilized daily. We understand those concerns, and we're trying to help mitigate those, incorporating plantings and other ways also to keep vehicles out of that location. So we're hopeful that these design changes are working towards a circulation aspect that the board is comfortable with, and that Mr. Clark may see as good modifications to that front, but ultimately those will directly play into what type of potential variance relief we may require, because as has been mentioned tonight, we provide so many spaces off-site, but other circulation mechanisms may, again, take away from what is otherwise provided.
Well, John, we'll start with you.
I'm still baffled by how this may work in practice. It just seems to me they're trying to cram too much stuff on a constricted site, and having a one-way or a dead-end parking lot is just a prescription for having people come in, find a jam lot, have to do a three-point turn and come back. And then the loop road in front of the church, this church is terrific, and there is an architectural design requirement in the historic preservation section that says it's not appropriate to disrupt the relationship between a historic building and its front yard or landscape. And this seems to me, paving a loop road and having people use it as a circulation, drop-off, wait, delivery, it just seems to me it's not well conceived. I think circulating through the parking lot and coming back out would be beneficial, because you'd be able to see whether there's parking, and then you'd be able to come out if there isn't, and you could drop off on the exit drive because it's 24 feet wide, enough to drop off, have people go around you while you're dropping off. It just seems to me that would be at least a viable way of dealing with circulation that's not a dead end. And it's not only the turnaround in front of the church, but it's the signs that would have to go in as part of the turnaround too. So now you're gonna have to have do not enter signs, you're gonna have to have one-way signs, you're gonna have to have do not park signs, stop signs. It just seems to me you're asking for a lot of clutter in front of that church that I just don't think it deserves it. So I think the circulation is a problem. It has been a problem, and it hasn't been addressed. The parking, I parked on Academy Street and walked down that slope. There's a wall there, but you can go around the wall. Anybody who's under 70 years old could manage it. I'm 71, I managed it. And then, there's the temptation to run across the street as you come running down the wall, the slope. So I think that still has to be addressed, how you would contain people from parking on the residential streets in that neighborhood across Walcott. I think the parking is the main concern. Parking and site circulation are the main concerns. That's the special permit standard that is the hardest to meet, I think, on your behalf, is that both the general special permit conditions and the HDLO section in the code both have conditions that require adequate parking. And having the possibility of parking at City Hall and asking people to walk up the street might work for some people, but a lot of other people are going to have their buddy drop them off and stop on 9D and let them out. And I don't know how you can stop that. You can put somebody out in front of the church, but it's not going to control 350 people trying to get into a place at exactly the same time and then leaving at the same time. The peak is really a peak. The other thing, in terms of the deductions you're asking for on parking, you can make your case to a zoning board of appeals, but the planning board has no authority to give you deductions. There's nothing in the code that allows you to take 25 or 10% off because you think some people might come by bus. As I pointed out, assuming 2.75 people per car in terms of the traffic study, but the parking requirement is only 1 per 4 occupants. So they're already counting it, giving you a substantial break on parking that would assume that it accounts for some of the alternative ways of getting there. So I think you have a parking issue. You can't assume that those public parking lots are going to be available forever. You have a site circulation issue because I don't think the turnaround in the front is a good idea from the historic preservation standpoint. I think the hotel works. I think you could make a case for a cafe. You could make a case for conferences as part of the hotel venue. But an event space for 350 people, I think, is just pushing it beyond the hope of that site. That's an opinion.
Thank you.
I'll just kind of go down the comments that we have, share with the board in some summary or somewhat. I think one concern that we have and that could come up with your submission to the state was regarding the truck turning templates. We had previously commented that the turning templates show vehicles entering the site having to encroach on other travel lanes. And then when they exit the site, they'll have to encroach on the two-way left turn lane. The state could possibly have a concern with that. We have a bit of a concern with it as far as when you have a shuttle bus during the peak hour, you'll have other cars coming out. You'll basically have to control traffic at the throat of the driveway so that the shuttle bus can enter. One recommendation that we have is to use the state's not the requirements, but their design guidelines to try and mitigate those issues. Rich, you'll see in the comment letter. But for the board's knowledge, the recommendation that we're making is to see about widening the driveway within the parameters that the state allows, and to design the driveway in a way that allows it to taper out, so that the driveway width would be at most 30 feet, but the opening at the road can be wider because it can taper out. That would hopefully help with any bus or larger truck to enter the site without having to encroach on the other lane. That's comments 1. We did review their site distance evaluation of the driveway. We'd requested that they do another site distance evaluation of the driveway serving the loop driveway. As they note in their analysis that the site distance does fall short, but it's only short by about 4 feet. And one important factor there is that it is not critically limited. So what that means is the sight distance at the intersection is greater than the stopping sight distance. If sight distance was less than stopping sight distance, we would have an issue because any vehicle or the vehicle on the roadway itself wouldn't have enough time to stop for a vehicle at the driveway. I think it was Rich spoke to the parking, off-site parking requirements that we've calculated were higher than what they had originally proposed, and part of that is the accounting for the hotel as having 4 people per room. I know one point that the board has brought up is the operations of the hotel and the matter of having 1 employee serving 30-room hotel. The Colliers has based their analysis on the parking requirements to determine peak demand. And based on our review of that, they have the right calculation, but how many employees you should have at a hotel is up for discussion. Lastly, as far as off-site parking locations, the Tompkins lot currently, based on the Main Street Access Committee's analysis, has 70 spaces. As Richard stated, that could be less. If it's less, then they're already close to fully utilizing that lot based on their off-site parking demand that we've calculated, which was 64 spaces. If that gets reduced by the expansion, or when that gets reduced, I don't know if or when, for the firehouse expansion, that lot will be overutilized, and they'll be seeking parking at other locations, including the Municipal Plaza and Beekman Street, which their study has indicated has parking availability. But as John Clark has stated, it's about directing patrons to those locations. And the report that they've provided states that they will adhere to a dissemination of parking information, but perhaps a more thorough traffic management plan would be helpful for the board to see when it comes to, say, a large event. And that could help alleviate concerns.
Could you step us through the assumptions for the parking requirement, and just, concisely, just kind of like, were the assumptions, for example, that, the event is 300 plus people, there's 30 rooms in the hotel, 4 people per room, that takes 120 off the table right there. Is that, can you just run through that rationale, please?
Right, so I think what we can go through is what Colliers has currently agreed to saying is the off-site parking requirements, which was, so the site has 3 proposed uses. There's a event space, there's a cafe, bar, restaurant, and there's a hotel. All 3 of those uses have parking requirement codes that the city of Beacon has set. The applicant has stated that the event space and the restaurant will not be simultaneous uses, so therefore there won't be people at the restaurant and bar, and also people at the event space.
Existing retaining wall.
So that means that the peak demand of parking spaces would be an event space and a hotel. So now, using the City of Beacon's parking requirements for those uses and the intensity that the project is anticipating, that comes to a total of 119 parking spaces. That's 31 for the hotel and 88 for the event space. What we are considering in our, so we've got 119 parking spaces.
For temporary events, not every day, 7 days a week. Temporary events.
Peak demand.
Peak demand, it's the worst case scenario.
But pragmatically, there will be, I can envision certain events, like, for example, if someone was having a wedding.
Which can be done at the current church.
Or a conference-type event that was like a multi-day situation where, in those two cases, probably everyone in the hotel would be an event participant, and they could be pulled out of the total. At the same time, I'm sure that hotel is going to bring in people who just want to come tour Beacon, so it's going to have its own independent utilization of whether there's, for example, a concert. And I think when there's a large event like a concert that's a high-intensity use, that it's going to have to, it should be acknowledged that at that point, the overlap between the hotel use and the event space, it's going to start to decrease significantly.
I think the other thing that's important to remember is there's sort of two like silos that we're talking about here. We're talking about what's required by code as far as what the parking requirements are for, just a strict application of the zoning requirements. And that's something that Dave Buckley, based on information provided by the applicant, is endeavoring to calculate and figure out what is the zoning requirement for parking, right?
Which is what we can enforce, is that what you're saying, versus
pragmatically,
what's
practically
really
speaking,
happen?
based on operations and based on a potential for shared use of parking spaces, the credits that we're talking about for people that are coming by train, what is sort of the demand that's going to be necessary for this. So what we need to determine is the baseline zoning requirements so that the applicant and the board will know what kind of variance the applicant needs to seek from the zoning board.
And the more uncertainty.
And then all of these other things about the credits and shared parking, those are all arguments or justifications that the applicant is presenting for reasons why they don't need the full gambit of what's required by the zoning code.
And at the same time, the more uncertainty there is, the more conservatism there should be in allotting credits, versus what the baseline requirement is.
And to one comment that John had made, we're not seeking a waiver or anything from the board. The code, what we were specifically identifying in our determination request is that the code as written says that we would have to seek that waiver. I don't know if it was intentionally written that way to avoid the 5-factor analysis by the zoning board, but it's a waiver or a variance. There's the option of getting a variance or a waiver. I don't know that it was intended to be so specific as to say, hey, we waive it without going through the analysis. The applicant would be submitting, we incorporated it as an option if that's somehow some way that the zoning board would look at it, but to the planning board attorney's point, we have to know the number so that we can know what we're charged with.
And then obviously layered on top of that is your seeker review, which traffic and parking is part of. You'll need to make a determination as to whether or not the project presents any significant adverse environmental impacts. Traffic and parking is part of that analysis. And then layered on that is also, as we talked about earlier, your special permit standards, which incorporate issues regarding traffic and parking. For example, the general special permit standards under 223-18 include the standard, and these are things that the applicant needs to sufficiently demonstrate to you so you can make a finding that they've met these standards in order to issue a special permit. One of them is that the location and size of the use, the nature, hours, and intensity of the operations involved in or conducted in connection with it, the size of the site in relation to it, and the location of the site with respect to streets giving access to it are such that it will not conflict with the appropriate and orderly development of the site and the existing permitted uses on adjacent blocks. Another standard relevant to what we're talking about here is that parking areas will be of adequate size for the particular use and properly located and suitably screened from adjoining residential uses. The entrance and exit drives shall be laid out so as to achieve maximum safety, and uses will not cause unreasonable traffic congestion or create a traffic hazard. So it's important to note that it says parking areas will be of adequate size for the particular use and properly located. It doesn't necessarily require that those parking areas be on-site, so it is appropriate that we're looking at off-site locations, but those off-site locations need to be of adequate size and properly located in relation to this use.
Don't they need to be specifically allocated in some legal way rather than just sort of notionally gestured at?
Absolutely. That's not in the code in this section, but absolutely.
Yeah.
So for example, right, you would want to make sure that they are sort of reserved for this use when this use needs to use them, and aren't going to be similarly allocated to 14 other uses.
Which we may have suspected has happened before in Beacon.
I mean, do we have
As an aside.
is there a mechanism like that we know of to do that, to, you know, to conserve that use?
Sometimes there are, sometimes mechanisms like deed restrictions or easements are used. It all depends on the circumstances.
May I ask a general parking?
We're going to come to the board. I want to kind of finish with professional, so we'll have all our questions in one place. So did you get your answer with regards to the formula, how they calculate?
Yeah, I think
Okay.
I'm good, so, but thank you very much.
Yeah.
So I think we were going through the parking requirements that we had kind of tabulated, and then our final comment was just to keep in mind that the use, you know, still has the restaurant use. We're very focused on the peak demand of an event, but to keep in mind there's the cafe and restaurant, and so that's why we had requested the study of the municipal lot during those operating hours of 1 to 5. We had no other comments at this time regarding this traffic and parking. So,
John?
So we're glad to hear that they're submitting to the DOT. Hopefully, the DOT can give some insight to the planning board also as to their concerns as we're going through this. You know, as Stark said, there's concerns with vehicles moving in and out, the access points. Since those roads are under DOT's control, it'd be nice to hear from them sooner than later as to what their concerns may be. Going through the plans, they've now shown all the headstones. They've now shown the proposed walk out to Beekman Street, although it shows differently on different plan sets. So that walkway and location should be coordinated on the plans. Lighting for that walkway, they said, will be coming in the future. They're reviewing that right now. Out on Beekman Street, the plan should be updated to show the sidewalk out there and how that's going to be interconnected. Grading that may be needed along that. I mean, that does drop off a couple of feet in the back. Some of the other comments I had, they said they're going to be coming forth in the future, and soil testing still needs to be conducted on the site at this time to move forwards with the design of the stormwater system. That's it.
Go ahead, you can.
Thank you. With regard to the calculation of available parking spaces in the neighborhood, could you just talk to like how that is assessed? You know, like there's supposedly 70 or 60 some odd spaces just at the Tompkins Hose, you know, but does that take into account the use of those, like, you know, what percentage of those spots are actually available? And then, again, to Len's point, how are these allocated to the use that they're asking?
So, I apologize, but I want to make sure I understood the question correctly. Was you're asking how are they determining the parking at Tompkins?
No, just in general, in looking off-site for parking spaces that are available in the neighborhood. How are they just counting the number of spots in each parking area? Do we take into consideration how heavily used those parking lots are already? How do we determine actually how many spots in a given public parking lot are available for this additional, you know, like demand?
Right.
So I don't know if you want me to address or.
I'll.
Good.
Okay. So what Colliers did was they went out and inventoried the parking lots. So they counted how many spaces are there. So, you know, say at the Tompkins or at the municipal lot, they counted how many spaces are available, or how many spaces are literally there. And then they counted how many cars are parked. So that determines how many spaces are available. And that's what they've done. So for instance, with the Tompkins lot, what they've done is they've got the estimate from the Main Street Committee's study, had 70 parking spaces there. They counted 5 cars, so there's 65 spaces available. So that's what they're doing. Does that answer your question?
That does. And then furthermore, if they're counting on, just for argument's sake, 10 parking spaces in the Tompkins lot, how are those preserved for this use?
No, so those would, to my knowledge right now, those spaces would be considered public parking still. So those are not set aside for this use. They're not, they're not designated, they're just public parking spaces. For instance, on Beekman Street, I don't know the exact parking regulations there, but those parking spaces would have, the parking regulations that are set would have to be adhered to. I believe the report states that it's managed by LAZ Parking. People would be paying LAZ Parking to park there and then attend something at this venue. So no, they're not stating any designation of a public parking space.
I want to do something. I'm sorry, go ahead, John.
I was just going to say that there are mechanisms available where they can be allocated, they can be specifically designated, either through, like if it's a city-owned parking lot, through a license agreement that would have to be approved by the city council, or an easement agreement, or other deed restriction. It depends on, like I said before, it depends on the circumstances, but there are agreements that can be entered into to make sure that those spaces are available when the use needs them.
But conceivably, somebody would have to administer that so that you don't have a situation where the firehouse decides to have a spaghetti dinner coincidentally on the same evening as the the Herbie Hancock concert, and suddenly there's this massive collision of like, uh-oh.
Yeah.
So it's like that. One of my fears is that we'll talk generically about mechanisms that could be put in place in the future to actually make all this happen, and then after the approvals, that all kind of falls apart and nobody does it. Because in a world where those things are carried out, stringently, there's somebody manning the parking lot that night saying event parking for concert X, waving people in with lights and actually so that they're not going onto the surrounding neighborhood streets or wherever, or circling in search of. And I think John, his concerns about the circulation of the parking lot go directly to this kind of situation where people who maybe aren't familiar with the location, they're coming to the event, they go, hey, let's just, I know it's supposed to be hotel parking, but let's just check and see if there isn't a space in there. And they pull into the driveway, get nosed into that dead-end parking area, no spaces, go to back up, oh, somebody's behind me, and you get this massive log jam. And, so there's so many things you can envision becoming a headache if it's not planned out in a way to deal with the human factor of people trying to get to an event.
I think functionally, and again, the discussion of the mechanisms and the enforcement pieces and how the two participants in those agreements have to work together to assure that certain things like that don't happen. Because the best laid plans are only effective by the actions taken by the people responsible. So we have a lot of scenarios that could functionally not work, but our power is only to figure out if it's feasible, if it can work from our preview, and the tools that have to be put into the power of the enforcement and the participants who by fact would not necessarily want to have a situation like that happen because it could negatively impact themselves and expose them to liabilities and everything else. So I tend to kind of look at things, and that's why while we discuss these things, I think it's important for us to be balanced with that.
Absolutely.
Because chaos happens.
Right, so
Crazy
but-
don't need an invite. It
Right,
shows
but-
up.
But so we should tilt the balance as much as possible in an effort to make it succeed.
Yeah, that's why
Right,
we
which
have
is like
to-
the questions of circulation and stuff.
No,
Yeah.
that's why we have to understand the foundation of where we start from and have everybody, all the participants understand that where the concerns are being driven. I have a serious concern about everything we're talking about, but standing back and looking at it and really understanding how do we have an actionable plan that could work, that could be enforced is the critical part. Because we can walk down the fear path and never get anywhere. We have to walk down a path that, is this feasible? Can it happen? I think 350 people inside of a situation like this, or 90, having been there when people come down that hill at like 900 miles an hour, that scares the heck out of me.
No, and we appreciate that, and I think that the board, and we're hearing those comments and understanding that what we're proposing is not one solution. We're trying to find a number of vehicles and mechanisms, circulation being one of them, off-street parking availability being another one, and certainly understand the concern of managing that. Of course, any agreement we'd create would be recordable, deed searchable, all of those things are different of criteria or ways to manage some of that crazy. But we also have to remember, this is a church that could have a wedding today without any of the circulation issue. I know we've talked about this, and I'm not trying to beat the dead horse here, but it is an existing condition. That's why there's benefits in your code for uses that were in existence in 1964. There are criteria. We're trying to make better a condition and hopefully be able to preserve and do good by this existing use on the site, and we're hearing those comments and working them in. We do see some shortcomings in some of the recommendations of the planner as we've tried to work them into our design. There are ways that maybe multiple means of, whether it's loop drive, multiple, ways to achieve this can help resolve some of that crazy or effectuate that. It might not be one solution, so we're not by any stretch suggesting that, but we're saying that there are ways to achieve that wouldn't affect the historic nature of the site. We're doing the loop drive we're proposing, the brick. I mean, we have other churches on Walcott that you have a loop drive. I mean, if you're headed up towards Mount Beacon, you coming into that site, there is a loop drive that connects to Walcott. So I'm forgetting the name of the church. I literally had it in my head, but we all know it. Sorry? St. Luke's. Thank you. Andrew. On Walcott, headed up towards Mount Beacon. So again, this is not this isn't something that isn't characteristic of a church. It's
That's got a massive property in front of it. I mean, I live right across the street from it, and that property's been designed a certain way down to the trees that were planted on it.
But there you just said
people
it.
who
I think,
up.
Len, that's an important point. Landscaping and other screening, is that to say that would affect negatively the historic aspect of the, so there are a lot of things here that are parsed out. So it's not just one driveway ruins, it's an existing driveway. We're looping it, we're connecting it, we're trying to make it better, we're narrowing it, we're adding things. So we're trying to come up with a lot of ways.
I understand that you need to advocate for your client, but I just don't lose sight when you say that this is an existing use, that the property that originally that church had for parking has been peeled off of it, and that church has been underutilized for decades. I mean, driving past it for decades that I've lived here, the Dutch Reformed Church congregation must have been microscopic for 20 years. It's, so it's not.
No, of course. And we didn't have West End Lofts, and we didn't have River Ridge, and we didn't have the Edge View. We didn't have, what is coming for Ferry Landing. So you're right. There's a lot of change that's happened here, and this is an effort to preserve some of what was and to better, to try and work.
Which I think is an excellent, and I remind myself constantly, just to make sure that people understand that I'm looking at this from a very balanced perspective. I very much want to see someone come in and maintain, lovingly take care of this place and find, a great use for it. I think everybody would benefit and be able to enjoy it. So don't misunderstand me, please.
No, absolutely not. We're here trying to work through these programs. We know we're early, it's early in the process. We're only in the secret review. We're not even in a hearing associated with the project. So we are still at it, and we're saying that those recommendations from Mr. Clark and your board, we're not just saying thanks, this is what it's going to be. We're not. We're trying to make those things work because that's what we need to do to satisfy your criteria. We've identified how we meet those criteria or satisfy them with what we're working on, but we need to continue to refine those so they meet your the seeker regulations and your special permit criteria as we have incorporated into our design, but we're going to continue to work those in.
I have a quick question, I'm sorry, just, do we have completed? Did you have a?
I have more, but go ahead.
Okay.
We'll come back.
When you did your calculation, I'm not directing to Richard, talking, you did your calculations. You saw 5 parking spaces at a specific time of day. Do
Right.
you look at other times of day to see if 5 goes to 10, 10 goes to 2?
Yeah,
Okay.
so we did our accounts, we looked at the Tompkins lot, the municipal lot, Beekman Street parking, over a course of 2 Fridays and 2 Saturdays for, I believe the hour, I don't have it right in front of me, but I believe the hours were from 1 o'clock in the afternoon until 8 o'clock at night, to get an idea of what that utilization is throughout the day. Actually, we might have even gone to 10 o'clock. I don't have the numbers right in front of me. But, and then the one thing that we didn't do was look at the municipal lot from 1 to 5 on those 2 Fridays and 2 Saturdays, because we felt that the utilization, or I'm sorry, on the 2 Fridays, because we felt the utilization was gonna be pretty high on a Friday, that it didn't really pay to look at that lot. But we did go back and take another look at that in the last submission. So, yeah, on an hourly basis, we have data of what the utilization is of each of those locations, so that we can get a number of how many spaces are available, and that was all identified in the study.
Catch up.
Thank you.
Yeah. And then I think the one other point I just wanted to make, and I think Stark actually made the recommendation, I think it's a good point based on what everybody's kind of saying tonight, is a traffic management plan for these events is probably something that makes a lot of sense for this proposal. So in that, we would identify things like how the parking lot would be managed during events, what kind of information would be disseminated to attendees prior to the event, how we would direct them to certain parking areas, how we would tell them, disseminate the information to not park on certain streets, or tell them where we want them to park so they don't park on those streets, how you arrive at the site from those locations. All those information can be, and how it's all managed can be incorporated into this traffic management plan, and that would more specifically lay out the information that we would try to disseminate to attendees of the events. And maybe that'll be a helpful piece of information for the board.
I think to Lynn's point, though, that we can only do what we can do respectively to even those plans. You know, as much as you may direct someone to tell them not to do or to do something, you really have no control over it. And I think the expectation of what this could potentially look like should be a consideration when we're looking at it all. So that way you're not walking yourself into a situation that lays out a plan that really falls out of your control at a certain point, because if all of a sudden 350 turns into 500, your best laid plans are a waste. But from an enforcement standpoint, we don't want to wind up putting undue burden on building department, police department, and other people because we didn't think about this stuff in advance. We want success. Yeah. So everybody does, but success comes at a cost.
Yeah, and the point of the traffic management plans is typically they become kind of living documents. So as things change in the area, those plans can change. But the operator of the facility can change those plans to make it work better. And sometimes there's things you don't foresee, and you can change those plans as you go forward. So but I do think it's a helpful piece of information for the board ultimately, especially because we can control how we operate the on-site circulation during these events, right? Yeah. So that's something we can specifically identify in that traffic management plan, and that we can provide, more specific information on.
Okay, thank you. I'm sorry, giving control back to you.
Thank you. So, again, I want to start out by saying, I really like the idea.
Speak a little closer to the mic, because there's a little...
I really like the idea of, reusing the space in the way that you are. Still seems like a really difficult needle to thread for the intensity that you're seeking, given the parking in particular. I think it would be helpful to hear more of the strategies, the proactive strategies that you're envisioning to use to alleviate the issues, such as the dead-end parking lot, which just seems like a nightmare waiting to happen. And then, on the more nuts and bolts to address the changes that you've done, I appreciate the landscaping plan. My question is there any flexibility in the loop as you have currently designed it to pull it away from the sycamore tree anymore, because that's a very large and sensitive feature of the existing landscape.
We'll certainly look at that, yeah.
Again, I just want to reiterate the soil conditions on the south property line. There's very shallow soil there. I think you need I'm happy to see the buffering. I think you need a strategy for how you're actually going to get the plants in the ground and surviving, whether it's a raised bed.
And we let Ms. Adams know from the last meeting that that is a condition known in that area.
Okay. And I look forward to hearing updates.
Thank you.
Yeah, I think a lot of people are hoping that something positive for the city happens here. Definitely, and there's a lot of potential for it to be beneficial. There's also a huge amount of impact for the people that live here if it's not managed and dealt with correctly. The biggest thing is the parking, obviously, and the other thing is like making sure that what is one of maybe 3 jewels in Beacon, the Howland Center, this building, the Craig House, is treated with the kind of respect visually that it deserves as a visual introduction to the city of Beacon. It's just it's worth it for the city to strongly encourage that front yard in front of the church be dealt with in the most sensitive way that it can be, because there's so much parking that is and circulation and other things. A lot of the parking is going to have to be dealt with off-site. That's one of the things that we have to deal with. I think that you could probably lose, if you could manage to lose a few parking spots and improve the landscaping, since the large proportion of it is going to have to be dealt with off-site. In any case, that's just my sense of the existing site plan. And also, since any of the solutions to this that have been envisioned, none of which are very firmly thought through, involve a public participation. I think the best strategy for you guys to pursue would be not to look for loopholes or exceptions in the code, but to actually design it to the best, the ideal condition for what you and the city want to do, and try to work with the city at some point, right, to come to an equitable and mutually beneficial solution to the problem, because that seems to be the only path that's there. And I think that the city's and the public interest should be thought through ahead of time before you, as part of the solution. So that's my take.
I think I've used up my time already. I don't have anything further right now. Thank you. Jill?
I concur with what's been said about the potential of this project being really exciting for the city of Beacon and the larger area. And also all the, it's really hard to see how it can be pulled off, frankly. Hard for me to see how it can be pulled off successfully. The parking is one issue, the landscaping is another, the impact on the historic site are all big issues. Traffic, of course. But a couple points. John Clark, were you proposing a driveway on the north side of the hotel?
Mm-hmm.
Is that?
I wasn't proposing anything. I was just suggesting that there has to be a better way than having the loop in front of the church.
Yeah.
And that they should look at other options.
Yeah. Because I like that idea, definitely. I'm really not in favor of the loop in front of, on the front lawn. I think it's important to have as much space around the church itself as possible. And it seems like a major impact on the site with very little to gain in the end for doing it. Whereas if you could, because there is a driveway on the north side of the hotel already, I know it's a dead end, but just wonder if that would be a possibility. There's also a curb cut there, I believe. I don't know. I mean, I just think we'll work with you as much as possible to try and make this happen. If it doesn't work out, I'm hoping that you have a backup plan, because I really want to see something work here. That's all.
Yeah. Well, I'm actually, I would say I'm proposing that there definitely should be parking on the right side, on the north side of the hotel. I'm not convinced yet that that's been thoroughly exhausted, and for a few reasons. If you look, it's not just a dead end. There's actually a crosswalk just north of that curb cut right now that, right next to the West End Lofts that is there, a crosswalk, right? And that probably, I would imagine, works well with traffic slowdown at that area. But the other thing is, it just seems like it's begging for a loop around the building, because you have all that parking in behind the new hotel. And again, I think a new drop-off in front of the church loses the opportunity for, say, a big wedding reception in front of the lawn. You know, you're sort of sacrificing the opportunity for a kind of outdoor public use of that space by having this driveway, this vehicular use. So I really think that there's a few reasons why I'd love to see that idea of a loop around the building to, again, prevent what I think it is inevitable that you're going to have people going into the dead-end parking lot. The other day I was at the parking entrance at the Hospital for Special Surgery in Manhattan, and I noticed that they entered on the left. You enter on the left and you exit on the right. So I just wonder if that's even maybe switching the ways you get in and out, if that would help your drop-off. It seems to me that you want to drop off on the long side of the church because you have the cafe in the back, so maybe somehow dropping off on the side of the church is actually preferable to your program than, say, dropping off right in the front of the historic entrance. So again, I see, like, if you're going to be improving the landscape between the development, just south of you, the driveway doesn't really help improve that buffer that you're trying to create. So, I mean, I would encourage you to just reconsider the parking on the north side of the hotel as an access.
And just to be, we are exploring that, and there is good sight distance in that area. I can speak to that, having spoken with our traffic engineer. So we're doing that. Is, of course, a narrower location, given the existing configuration and working with the existing parsonage building. But we are exploring all of these means. It was initially identified as not the, I guess, the preferred mechanism to try and do that. But we're certainly hearing the comments tonight and know we need to work with the design to try and make these things work.
This is early days yet. I just wanted to say, for the purpose of records, we have two public comments that were sent in via, I believe, email from Miss Betty Wall and Arthur Cammons. I'm sorry. So they're available for review by the public. Jennifer, just your thoughts. I mean, we've got a lot more to go. A lot more to do, but the board's feelings with respect, because you're scheduled to go before the city council?
We'll be so this is right, so I'll just touch on two things, Jennifer, just very quickly. One, we're only in the seeker review process right now for this application. This is the only board but for the zoning board that we'd appear with in connection with this special permit. This the planning board is the reviewing agency and the lead agency in the seeker review. So the only other board that we would appear before is the zoning board. And we understand that there's still some, we're still working out the final number for the variance, but because the zoning board is a involved agency in the seeker review, we might ask that the board, instead of referring us specifically for a variance that would be necessitated, to get comment from that involved agency as part of this process so that we can meet with the board, identify, again, understand that what we're seeking ultimately, because we will, if we maintain the project as designed, will require a variance that is going to be determined by the building department, and that will be the letter of the law as far as the number that we need. So we're not there yet, but we are in the secret process, and it would be important for the applicant to have the opportunity to speak to that agency about their involvement and ultimately any recommendations they might have to your board as the lead agency in the secret process. So we would seek the board's leave to appear. It's not an informal appearance, but a seeker appearance, so to speak, at the zoning board.
Right, so one option on the table for you tonight is to refer the application to the zoning board, as Taylor mentioned, not for consideration of the variance because you haven't completed seeker yet. So the zoning board can't act on that variance, but you might benefit from their comments in relation to your seeker review. Similarly, the applicant might benefit from their comments. If the ZBA takes a look at this and says, sorry, there's no way we can see granting this variance, or vice versa, we see as long as you address X, Y, and Z, this may not be a problem. I think the applicant is looking to get that informal feedback from the zoning board, and like I mentioned, it would also be helpful to you to hear their feedback for your seeker review. So,
because it seems to be the only way we'll have vision into this mysterious number that has yet to be calculated anyway.
Well, you'll have the number regardless of whether it goes to the zone. Yeah, that's just a matter of working out with the building inspector and getting that calculation pinned down. And we're close. There's just a little bit more information we may need to get from the applicant to clarify a couple things. But yeah, that is an option that's available for your board tonight.
Can we take a straw poll on that to see how everyone feels about that?
Just throw in one point before you do the straw poll. Normally, the way it works is that you make a referral and you make a recommendation. So the zoning board has an update as to what the planning board's feeling on a certain project is before they make a determination. If you just refer it to them cold, they will not know what your concerns are. And they will hear the applicant's side of the equation, but not the planning board's concerns. So my suggestion would be, if you're going to refer it for a, initial look, that at the very least, the planning board should send not recommendations, but a list of concerns that might come up as part of their deliberation.
Right.
So that, it's not, I'm afraid that I don't want to see two boards working against each other with a different set of facts.
Right, no, understood. Thanks for stealing my thunder. I think that's exactly after, wanted to get a feeling from the board with respect to doing this, but being very clear on what our concerns are so that there is no ambiguity at the ZBA side. So I just wanted to see everybody felt about that.
I think it would make sense to get their input based on our concerns that this is feasible, given the parking discrepancies.
Yeah, I'd like the parking to be determined by like a best practices traffic review that's based upon the actual ways that Beacon operates and uses parking and walks and just basically use transportation in general.
I think the specific question is referring it to the ZBA with our recommendations.
And my point about that is that I would prefer the parking to be determined by an objective process rather than, what I'm worried about is that that number is determined by a abstract formula, right? Or that it's determined by a hunch that you could just waive parking requirements. That's the thing that I would be concerned about. Neither one of those would work.
Well-
So I have concerns about the process not being objective if it's not addressed responsibly by either of the parties.
Right, and you have the city's traffic consultant, which
Right.
has applied objective standards in reviewing the work done by the applicants.
Who have all done great
Traffic
work.
and parking
Yeah,
consultant
and I'm
as
not
well.
saying
yeah.
any- I'm not
Right, so
casting
those are
anything.
the objective standards
Yeah.
that have been applied
Yes.
thus
Yeah.
far.
Mhm.
And the zoning board would also have the benefit of seeing those parking studies and review memos from Crete and Manning as well.
Yeah, so I just want to make sure, because just for clarity, so you would be good with the referral to the ZBA with for them to, I mean, that's what I'm trying to clear.
Yeah,
Are you
with-
saying yes or no?
Yes, with the
Okay.
caveat, with John's comments, that we give our opinion.
Okay, then,
Yeah, let's refer it to the ZBA with our concerns listed out for them.
Jill?
So basically, we're asking the ZBA to tell us if they think this has a chance of approval?
What you're interested in hearing from the ZBA is any comments or feedback that they may have, because they're an involved agency in the secret process. Your secret review will be applied to their review of the variances. They are subject to your secret review, because you're the lead agency. So as lead agent, you want to get the feedback and input from all of the other agencies with approval authority, so that you're taking into consideration any concerns or issues that they may have as you come to your conclusion. So that's what you would be looking for from the zoning board. Any concerns, issues, comments that they may have relative to the parking variance that the applicant would be seeking, so that you could take that in consideration when you're
Okay.
doing your review.
Yeah, absolutely. Let's get some input. Yes,
Yeah, I agree. as
So,
well.
so can I have a motion?
motion.
Can I have a second?
Second.
All in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
Opposed? So how do we effectively do this?
Right, so similar to when you're doing, memos to the city council on a local law referral, I can work with John Clark and with Etha to prepare a memo from the planning board to the zoning board that outlines the comments that you raised tonight. My suggestion would be to preface it that, it sounds like a consensus of the board was that this is an exciting use. It's an exciting proposal, one that would be, a benefit to Beacon, but you're concerned about the intensity of the use and the scope of the use at this point. And to raise the concerns about feasibility of staying within the confines of what's being proposed here. You want to make sure that objective standards are applied, perhaps provide them with copies of Crete and Manning's memos. And if there's anything else I'm leaving out, let me know, but we can.
Okay, it's a draft, and we'll just take a look and make sure all the pieces are there.
Yes.
Okay.
Yeah.
That's it,
So
thank you.
if that's good,
That's
you
it from us.
can maybe do a motion to authorize or direct myself and Etha and John
Okay.
to work on that memo
Can
on
I
your
have a
behalf.
motion? Second?
Seconded.
All in favor? Lynn?
Aye.
Aye.
Lynn, yeah. All right, thank you.
Thanks so much.
Appreciate it.
Thank you.
On to miscellaneous business, we're going to flip a little bit. Etha, I didn't see a ZBA agenda.
It was online, sorry.
Oh, it's okay.
One, it's a small area there.
Okay, so it's,
Really, probably no concern.
okay. So we just have a consideration request for 190-day extension of a subdivision, Manel Place. Okay.
Yeah, I'm here to answer any questions, but the plans have been dropped off. All the resolution items have been fulfilled. We just put the request in the event that Mr. Gunn didn't get to the plans to sign them in time. And I assume they haven't been signed yet since he's not here yet today.
Okay.
Can I? Okay, that's.
Anybody have a motion on this? Any concerns?
What are we, I'm sorry,
Sorry,
just,
a 90-day
extension for
yeah, no,
Manel Place.
what needs to be accomplished?
They just need to be signed by the chairman at this point.
Yeah, this Sean didn't get to sign.
Oh, okay. No, I don't have any objection.
Okay. anybody-
Motion.
Second?
All in favor?
I'm looking for a second.
I'll second it.
Okay.
Sorry.
All in-
My bad.
All in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
All opposed?
Aye.
Done.
Thank you.
Motion to adjourn?
Motion.
Second.
All in favor?
Aye.
Thank you, everybody.
Kevin.
Kevin.
The only thing I said.